You might be wondering why all the fuss about socialism versus capitalism in this election cycle. Well, stay tuned. You're about ready to find out how that affects your ability to create wealth and make it sustainable.
You're listening to Wealth Talks with Dr. Tom and John McPhee. We have a special guest on the line today, Dr. Ralph Reed. Dr. Reed is the founder and chairman of Faith and Freedom Coalition. It's a pro-family public policy organization with over 2 million members. He's worked on 11 presidential campaigns, a senior advisor on a couple of those, and he currently serves on the pro-life and evangelical committees for President Trump's re-election campaign. The Wall Street Journal has called him perhaps the finest political operative of his generation. Mr. Reed, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much. Good to be with you.
Well, we're just excited to have you because of your broad experience. And, just recently you were here in Las Vegas and you had a spontaneous worship in one of the casinos. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came down?
Yeah, we are doing Evangelical for Trump coalition events around the country in all the key states as part of the campaign. And I'm on, we're a few hats at the campaign, including as part of the Evangelicals for Trump coalition effort. And there were restrictions imposed by the governor of Nevada that prohibited churches from having more than 50 people in attendance, but allowed casinos to be occupied up to 50% of capacity. Mm-hmm. And so rather than go to a church, which is where we might have normally gone, renting the facility, we rented a casino in Las Vegas. And when the Las Vegas City Council found out about it, they tried to shut down the event. They threatened the owner of the hotel with the loss of their business license and fines. But we were in clear compliance with guidelines involving COVID-19 restrictions in Las Vegas and in Nevada. And we probably had somewhere between 700 and 1,000 people there, and they were socially distanced, and people were wearing the mask. And I took a video of it and pointed out that they wouldn't let us meet in a church, so we rented a casino to have a prayer and praise meeting for evangelicals who are supporting President Trump. And that went viral on Twitter. I think the last time I checked, and it's been a while, the video of that meeting had been viewed over 700,000 times. Nice. So they tried to stop us. We would not permit that. We had many attorneys involved, and it was a great meeting. We're just out there trying to energize people of faith who are a key part of our coalition. Self-identified evangelicals gave 81% of their votes to Donald Trump in 2016 and only 16% to Hillary Clinton. That's the highest share of the evangelical vote won by a presidential candidate of either party in the history of modern American politics. And I think that he will do even better in 2020.
Wow. So we're definitely living in interesting times right now. Not only is it election year, but unusual things are happening with the economy, and there's a lot of government limitations, like you just mentioned, around the virus, and even social demonstrations kind of arising out of this. Do you see the government limitations around the virus, some of them very strenuous, and some of the social demonstrations, even the rioting that's going on? Do you see these as issues connected to the 2020 election?
I certainly think that there are aspects of them that are political. There's no way around the fact that when you're dealing with elected officials, whether they're governors or mayors or state legislators, we're relevant. You can't ignore or deny that there are politics involved. You often hear people say that we ought to make decisions based solely on the data and based solely on the science. But the fact is the science is in some dispute, and in some cases the science is not altogether clear. Mm-hmm. Remember that at the beginning of the pandemic, the World Health Organization, which turned out to be dreadfully and almost criminally wrong, indicated that there was no reason for people to be overly concerned about the virus at the outset. Dr. Anthony Fauci, arguably one of the most respected and experienced infectious disease experts, not only in the United States, but in the world. A man who did extraordinary service during the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, said that people in the United States didn't need to really be worried about it. Mm-hmm. And so, as we've learned more about the virus, I think we're learning that some of these shelter-at-home restrictions, where people are basically, kept at home, number one, aren't necessarily effective because eventually you have to come out. And secondly, the testing is not necessarily the solution that we thought, because once there's community spread, other than you knowing whether you have it or not, which is obviously a good thing to know, once there's community spread, which we've clearly reached that point in most states, contact tracing is extremely difficult. Mm-hmm. This is not like a sexually transmitted disease where you identify a positive case and then you're going to them to find out who they've been with. This thing is so easily transmitted and so highly infectious that there's no way to trace that, not the way we had hoped. So, yes, there are political aspects of it, but I think that our federal system is overall working as well as could be expected. It's a mix of state power, local power, and federal power. And I think the federal government's job is to assist states, localities, and communities.
Absolutely.
They've done a terrific job in that area, I think.
And that's the federalist view of things. It's certainly not the socialist view, which thinks that everything should be centralized and pressed down upon the American people. And that's really what we're struggling against in this election cycle, is people that have come out super, super progressive, if you can call it progressive, and those people that want to hold on to the traditional founding fathers' view of this country. Just watching like Tim Scott last night and how he had started the opportunistic zones with Donald Trump, and $75 billion now are going to impoverished areas in our country from private industry, not from government. Isn't that the difference that we're looking at in this election? Are we going to go forward into something that's completely chaotic, or are we going to hold to the traditions that we've built this country on?
I don't know the answer to the outcome of the election. I do think that it is instructive that when you look at the last time we had a Democratic administration come into office, which was in 2009, and they attempted to move forward with socialistic enterprises like, the stimulus package and Obamacare, that they sparked a Tea Party movement at the grassroots that pushed back very strongly, led to 63 seats being gained by Republicans in the House, and then ultimately the Republicans got the Senate back, and then they got the White House back. So I think there was definitely a response to an attempt to government overreach and having government dictate and manage every area of our lives. Mm-hmm. I believe that freedom is in the DNA of the American people. Mm-hmm. I think it goes back to our founding, and even before our founding, as a formally constituted nation. And I think the elements of that freedom, or of that democratic republic, are civil society, faith in God, free markets, and the rule of law, and limited government. I think those 5 pillars are what has made America great, and a vibrant civil society and faith in God and strong families. is what's made this country great, not an all-powerful centralized government. That's what our founders believed. I believe today that is held by the vast majority of the American people. And candidly, in my lifetime, I don't know that there's been a sharper contrast between two alternative visions for the future of the country being offered by two competitors for the highest office in the land, one the incumbent, the other, of course, Joe Biden, the former vice president. I mean, this is not your daddy's Democratic Party. It's moved far to the left. When I was growing up in Georgia in the 70s and 80s, frankly, there were a lot of Democratic candidates and Democratic voters that were more conservative than the Republicans. Pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, opposed to higher taxes. Those days are really over. These two parties resemble much more European ideological parties.
Yes.
With the Republican Party being a faith-based, free market, limited government party, and the Democratic Party being robustly pro-government, pro-centralized power, and advocating socialism.
You know, Dr. Reed, many people call our country a democracy, and you've said something earlier that we're a democratic republic. How does a democratic republic differ from a democracy?
Well, a democratic republic differs from a pure kind of Greek-style, ancient Greek-style democracy in that while the majority rules and while the people are sovereign, there are restrictions on the power of the government. So you can't just take a vote and deny somebody the right to speak. There are certain rights and certain protections in our form of government. Those rights and protections are cherished and sacrosanct, and they are found in many places, but institutionalized in the Bill of Rights. So the right to freedom of assembly, to speech, to freedom of religion, the right to keep and bear arms. Government can't restrict that. You can't just take a vote and deny those things. The other way that a Republican form of government is different, in at least within the context of the American founding, is in the diffusion of power. So our founders believed that men and women, that humanity, when given an unlimited power, would inherently abuse it, that it was the nature of the human experience that power is abused by those who possess it. And in order to limit those abuses, they divided the power at the national level among three branches of government so that there were three co-equal branches and they each checked each other's power. And then the other way they did it was by creating our not entirely unique, but certainly an improved federal system where power is diffused between the federal, the state, and the local levels of government. So power is dispersed at the federal level three ways, and then it's dispensed down three ways. And that prevents anybody from ever having all the power. And that's the main difference.
That's important. Yeah, that structure is so important. So you released a book this year titled For God and Country, making the case for why Christians should support Donald Trump. And obviously the evangelical community was very instrumental in electing Donald Trump in 2016. And you're predicting that could be the case again for 2020, the elections here. But why do so many Christians today preach political surrender, that you shouldn't be involved in politics, that you should pray, but that's it, not take any action on that? What is your response to them?
Well, I talk about that a little bit in the book, and I point out that while that kind of almost monastic kind of withdrawal from the larger society may be desirable from the standpoint of personal sanctification, it's not really a biblical model for our earthly citizenship or even for the witness of our faith. You can go through the Old and New Testament, and I do a little bit of that in the book. I talk about the fact, for example, that the Apostle Paul was a Roman citizen, and that when his rights as a Roman were being violated, that he appealed his case to Caesar. He exercised his citizenship in a robust manner. He didn't have the right to vote for Caesar, but he did have a right to appeal to Caesar. And it was because he did so and he took his rights, responsibilities, privileges, and prerogatives as a Roman citizen seriously that the gospel reached the very courts of the emperor. And the Bible records that many members of Caesar's household came to faith in Christ as a result. So there is an eternal dimension to this. We're called as Christians to be involved in politics and government. First of all, to defend our own rights. Those rights we believe are God-given. They're not given by Congress or the president or by the framers. They're given by Almighty God, and our leaders simply recognize those rights. They didn't give them to us. They can't take them away. And the second reason why we do so is to defend the innocent, the vulnerable, the poor, and others among us. But the third reason why is because when we do so, as believers who carry the message of Christ wherever we go, we carry that message to the highest levels of government, which we know from history, our own history, as well as biblical history, can have an altogether salutary effect on the life of individuals and nations. So I wrote the book not so much as a defense of Donald Trump, although I do plenty of that, and proudly so. He's a friend. I have a roughly 30-page appendix that details the many achievements and accomplishments of his first 4 years in office. But I really wrote the book as a defense of the faith community and as a defense of Christians who have been called every name in the book. They've been accused of being hypocrites and frauds and phonies and spiritually bankrupt simply because they voted for a man who, while he is not perfect and he hasn't lived a perfect life, stands for the values and advances the issues that they care about. And I know that those things that are said about those Christians are not true. They're not only lies, they're smears against people who really genuinely wrestled with the decision they confronted in 2016. Remember, Donald Trump was not their first choice for most of them. Two-thirds of them voted for someone else in the Republican Party primaries. But when confronted with a binary choice between two less than perfect candidates, they didn't choose the lesser of two evils. They chose the greater good. And the greater good was a candidate who was advocating the protection of innocent human life, the protection of religious freedom, strengthening our economy, securing our border, and defending the state of Israel. And those are greater goods. They're not lesser evils. So I think they did the right thing, not just politically. I think they did the right thing morally and ethically. And frankly, on many of these issues, life, Israel, religious freedom, and others, they've been totally vindicated in the decision they made. And that's why they're going to vote for him in even bigger numbers in 2020.
Very good. So I'm going to bring up your book right now. You know, you make the case really well for this in your book as well, and I'd highly recommend people get a copy of that. You can get it online. We're also doing a special giveaway here on the podcast today. You can go to life-benefits.com/Ralph Reed, and we're putting the link in the resources for this show as well, so you can go there and you can sign up to enter to win a free copy of the book. Dr. Reed's publisher has provided us with a copy of For God and Country, and so we're going to do that special promotion. You can enter to win a free copy, or you can get your copy online. It's a great read.
So something I hear you repeating over and over during this brief podcast, Dr. Reed, is the idea of freedom. And without freedom, we become a totalitarian state, or we become subject to tyranny, or we become subject to someone else telling us what to do with our personal property, our beliefs, our resources financially, and everything else. Is personal freedom a Judeo-Christian value?
I believe it is. I think that if you look at the Gospels, the message of the gospel is freedom, freedom from sin, freedom from bondage. The Apostle Paul says that because there was slavery at that time in the Roman Empire and in the ancient world, it wasn't the chattel slavery that we had in the American context in the 18th and 19th centuries, but it was slavery. And Paul makes a fascinating statement where he says, if you come to know Christ as a slave, you are Christ's freedman. You are free in him. And if you come to know him as a free person, you become his bond slave. That is to say, you become his servant. It's a fascinating turn of a phrase and a way of thinking about it, because what that means is you're free, but you're not free to do whatever you want. It's not libertinism. It's not just if it feels good, do it. It's a freedom to do the right thing. It's a freedom to become a better person. Now, in the political context, I think what that means is the most effective form of government that we've ever devised in the history of the human race is a form of government, I believe the one you see in the United States. It obviously derives from the British context, goes back to the Magna Carta and the freedoms that were granted to British citizens, and then ultimately the Glorious Revolution, that whole background. That was the heritage that we had as, Brits initially in the colonies. But in the United States, it took the form of recognizing that all men and women are created equal, that they're endowed by God with inalienable rights, that is to say, rights that are inherent to their humanity, and that the sole purpose of establishing and instituting a government is to protect those rights. And in the Declaration of Independence, our founders said that if at any point in the future the government so established fails to protect those rights, then the citizens not only have the right, they have the moral duty and obligation to overthrow that government and to establish a new one that will. So government is there to protect our rights given by God, and it protects us from each other so that we're not violating those rights themselves. And then our charter, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, restricts the government so that it can't violate our rights. And it begins the seed of the whole experiment in self-government, is that we are created by God, that he makes all of us equal in his eyes, and that he gives us certain rights that no one, including our rulers, is allowed to abrogate. It is often not fully understood in the modern context what a radical and a revolutionary idea that was. It is probably the most transformational single idea in all of human history, apart from the Gospels.
I would agree. That's so true. So with that responsibility, for so many Americans, average American families, it's easy to feel like a really small fish in a really big pond during this time. What is it possible for the average American to do in order to effectively take a stand for their values and to protect our future? And maybe along with that goes the question, what is your organization, the Faith and Freedom Coalition, doing to promote these values?
Well, I think we have a responsibility that's threefold. Number one, to be educated and informed. The Bible says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. If we don't know who our leaders are, and we don't know where they stand, and we don't know what's happening from a policy standpoint, we are by definition impotent and ineffective in our citizenship. So we have to be informed. One of the things my organization does, Faith and Freedom Coalition, is it informs people of faith in a timely manner via newsletters, our website, action alerts, text messaging, social media posts. We keep people updated on what's going on, and the information is reliable and it's accurate. The second thing we have a responsibility to do is to be registered to vote and to vote. I talked earlier about how the Apostle Paul had what very few people in occupied Judea and Samaria had in the first century AD. He was a citizen of Rome. He had certain rights. He took them seriously, not because he thought that was the answer to everything. He didn't, but because he had been privileged to be born in a society where he had those rights, and we have these rights. So at a minimum, we should be registered to vote and vote. We should be participating in elections and choosing leaders who share our values and will advance them. And then the third thing that we need to do is seek to influence public policy, particularly to those we have helped elect. We need to make our views known. We need to do it in a timely manner when the legislation or the policy is being considered. And I'll just give you one current example beyond the election, which is now less than 70 days away as we talk today. And that is the many restrictions in some states, not most thankfully, on the right for people of faith to gather in houses of worship. I believe that is a serious restriction on the First Amendment.
Yes.
There are cases, including during a pandemic, when those are appropriate and required. But I think in many cases, there have been abuses, there have been violations of our rights, and there's been a double standard, like the one that we had in Nevada, where you could go to a casino, but you couldn't go to a church.
Yes. Yeah.
At least not in a crowd of more than 50 people. And I just find it interesting that we live in a society where, as we began to reopen, it was okay to go to a liquor store, it was okay to go to a massage parlor, and it was okay to go to a casino, but the churches were ordered closed. Again, not in every state, but in far too many. And that's when you need to make your voice heard. That's when you need to be influencing public policy, because those decisions are ultimately made by government officials.
Yeah, so that's what your organization is doing, is helping to make that voice heard at a high level, and you seem to be doing a great job with that. Another voice, another place where you've definitely made your voice heard was with the criminal justice reform. I know you were instrumental in passing that, and President Trump even thanked you and your organization publicly. So we appreciate that, and thanks for sharing with us a little bit about what you're doing there.
Yeah, and then the other thing that we're doing, particularly in these remaining, 70 some odd days before the election, is we've identified a total of about 41 million evangelical and other conservative voters of faith in all 50 states. About 26 million of those are in the roughly 18 to 20 states that will decide the outcome of the election. Those aren't just the important states for the presidential race, like Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, but they're also key states for control of the U.S. Senate and the House. And in those states, we're going to be contacting those 26 million voters by phone, by text, by email, by mail. We're going to be knocking on doors, ringing doorbells. And we believe that through all those efforts, a total of about 200 million voter contacts, or an average of about, 7 to 10 voter contacts for every one of those voters, that we're going to turn them out at the biggest numbers and in the highest percentage that we've ever seen in a presidential election, at least in many decades.
That's awesome.
Very good.
Well, Nancy Pelosi spoke from the House floor the other day, calling Trump supporters the enemies of America. And I just appreciate what you're doing, Dr. Reed, to bring timely and accurate information to the American public, because Jesus said that it's the truth that will set us free. And organizations like yourself and the work that you're doing are bringing the truth to Americans so they can make a decision, because there is so much propaganda that's spread out there that is totally inaccurate, that's twisted, that's warped, that's not based on what our founding fathers wanted this country to be. So I personally thank you, and I know many, many of our listeners are going to thank you as well.
Absolutely. So be sure, as you're listening to this, go get a copy of Dr. Reed's book, For God and Country. You can also sign up for the giveaway that we're doing on the website, life-benefits.com/Ralph Reed. You can enter to win that book as well. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Reed. Are there any final words you'd like to leave us with today?
Vote. Vote early, by mail or in person, and if you don't vote early, or your state doesn't have an early voting program, vote on Election Day. This is a cherished right. We're so privileged and so blessed to have it. Let's take it seriously and honor the memory of those who paid the ultimate sacrifice so that we could have this right. Everybody go to the polls.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. That's right. And be sure you vote, go to the polls, and make your values heard this election. Thank you again for joining us, Dr. Reed. You are listening to Wealth Talks, where we bring you the facts so you can thrive in life. Have a wonderful week.